Welcome back to Presbygirls, the extremely low budget dollar store version of Presbycast, but with better hair, maybe. Just like CrowdStrike, we've been offline for a little while, but we promise it's been for good reasons. Today's guests are Perry and Robin McCall, and we're very excited to have them on the show. And of course, as in true Presbycast fashion, I will remind them that they are allowed to say as much or as little about themselves as possible. But given that the show is about them, we're excited to hear from them. And I'll pass it over to Sarah, and she will give us a quick introduction of our topic and introduce our guests.
So, this might be hard for Zoe and I, but we're going to try to be as quiet and shut up as much as possible, and let Perry and Robin talk. And Perry McCall was actually, he and Sean overlapped at RTS for a little bit. So Perry and Sean go back a little bit. But we're going to be talking today about more of a heavy subject, and a subject that impacts anybody who's been in a church more than 5 years. Perry and Robin have an 18-year-old son, Andrew McCall, who was diagnosed with leukemia back in, what was that, 2017? And their story is incredibly long and incredibly frustrating and hard beyond any parent's imagining. And so what we're going to be trying to do today is talk about what happens when this happens to a family. What happens when you get diagnosed with a serious illness, especially a family whose child gets diagnosed with a serious illness and everything that goes along with that. So Perry, Robin, I'm going to hand it over to y'all and just tell everybody how everything happened, your all's personal story, and we'll go from there.
I was going to try and avoid Sean, but that's okay.
We all try, Perry, and sometimes we're not that successful. But
It's I'm Perry, and this is Robin. What I will do, because it helps for the sake of time, is the thing that you have read. I'll just kind of go through that part of the story for Andrew, and that kind of sets aside. But first things, as you said, I'm teaching elder in Mississippi Valley Presbyterian, pastor of Carolina Presbyterian Church, and now with RTS Jackson, Church Relations and Advancement. And so you too can partner with RTS Jackson and just give me a call. But as we do those things, my wife, Robin, we've been ministry, together 26 years now. I've been preaching and whatnot, beginning in Baptist life, became PCA in 2010, 28 years, somewhere along those lines altogether. Did kind of overlap with Sean and that crew at RTS Jackson. 2010, and making that switch here in Mississippi Valley as part of Credentials and doing the men work when we still had it on the Jackson campus then. And as we, did that, kind of just met all those guys, for a little while. But in mentioning Andrew and this concept of, or not concept, but issue of serious illness, he was diagnosed June 2nd, 2014 with high-risk T-cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia, ALL, T-cell ALL. He was treated 3 years, 4 months, 19 days for his leukemia, and his end of initial treatment was October 2017. He relapsed in April 2018 after he'd been 5 months off of his treatment. June 25th in 2018, he had his bone marrow transplant. There's 100 days as a part of that process, and he finished that on November 1st, 2018. In 2019, he contracted interstitial pneumonia from contracting RSV. That resulted in him being in the hospital for 102 days, incubated for a good bit of that on the ventilator. That was his only call in the family moment of when he was supposed to die and not make it. 3 years of recovery from that. He's had critical care myopathy after that period. They shut your muscles down, give you paralytics, and after that, you recover and learn to walk. But he was a part of the little small percentage that doesn't recover. So it took him a couple of years for him to learn how to walk again, get his muscles firing. He has permanent damage called avascular necrosis in both his ankles and his knees. It's bone death, bone tissue death. So both of his ankles are what's referred to as, they call them completely shatter fractured. The x-rays, they look like, frosted windshield or a shattered windshield with your car. As he has continued with his recovery, he's been losing his bone marrow transplant engraftment. So his blood is now mixed. At one point, it was down to kind of 70-30, roughly, of his donor cells versus his own cells, which in the very beginning of that is this major sign of relapse, but he wasn't. He has maintained that. And as horrible as that sounds, if it is stable, then it's okay. So that's kind of just the way things go with these things. He now has just all kinds of collateral damage between his lungs, his heart, his eyes, his bones. He has PTSD and severe sleep apnea. The only thing he's been released on is his kidneys. The doctor has actually released him. He does not go to yearly or regular appointments for that. But other than that, pretty much just about every other organ system, they function, but not great. And there's just something off or wrong with them. But you would never have any idea if you looked at him. It looks like a linebacker, so just, on the outside, it's all fine. Surgeries, he had 4 ports, many lumbar punctures for his bone marrow aspirates, get his bone marrow, testing, and bless his heart, because of just his circumstances in being diagnosed, his first 4 to 6 bone marrow test was without any anesthesia. They just had to do it old fashioned, put a little lidocaine on him. And unfortunately, I got to see it one time. Dr. Davis, who's, 6'3", 6'4", 280, 320, who knows, this big lineman looking of a doctor, literally up on his knees. And basically it's basically like a meat cleaver with just a long little thing with a little hook on the end. They just dig it back into the back of that pelvic bone and just pull some out. And so that was his first month of introduction. He had a lymphomic mass right in with his heart and his lungs. So they couldn't put the port in, couldn't put him down, all these different things. And so it just took a little while before they could just knock him out and get it. But he's had just many of those. He had a biopsy.
This is mediastinal mass.
Mediastinal mass. That was just not a tumor mass, but with all those blood cells and everything clumped in, and it was between the heart and the lungs and all the blood vessels. So I had to do the little radiation knife going in there to that. He's had a spleen removed from this avascular necrosis. He has a broken femur with screws placed in to do that. Tonsils and adenoids removed. And then over all this, now it's been 10 years, but there was 8 years of just constant battle. These last 2 years has been kind of just the recovery and the aftermath. But he has had we just lost the ability to count. He's had over 100 days worth of in the hospital admissions. And actually pull that back. I forgot this was written down wrong. He has had over a calendar year worth of days admitted in the hospital as collected over the time. He has surpassed a year's worth. And then he's had one time where he was in over 100 days at one point, and then multiple times of 30 or 40 days plus. And so it was, over a calendar year worth of days, and then multiple times where it was just long extended days. And then however many times he was just in for 7 to 14 days, and something along those lines. And through just bad communication on some people's parts, we needed some records, and we had basically a U-Haul truck pull up, and they had the entirety of his records for him, which is well over 20,000 pages, and with just well over 10 5-gallon boxes full of those papers, and that was before a couple of years worth of more records. They're just along in the process. And so at the Children's Hospital here in Mississippi, he's been in the emergency room, the cancer clinic, the PICU, pulmonary and respiratory therapists, the kidney doctors, the cardiology, been general surgery, radiology and imaging, radiation. He had 8 days cranial. Then he had 11 days of chest, 4 days of 2 times a day. So over 8 rounds of full body radiation. As you prepare for the bone marrow transplant, they kill all of your bone marrow. You just kill everything that's in you. And that's why in that moment, you reach a point in that process, you've got about a week. You're either going to live or not, because you completely kill everything. They put it in, it either takes or it doesn't. And within those first 4 to 7 days, little period there, is kind of your first round of if you're going to live or not. And you kind of go through that, in different stages. After you pass that first week, if something comes up, there's some things they can do. In that first week, you just kind of go into that period. And then he's been on multiple floors at the hospital, orthopedic, gastroenterology. One of our ruling elders at First Pres and board members here at RTS, Dr. David Elkin, runs the case center. He has watched over him for his PTSD. He's been in the adult critical care unit for the bone marrow transplant, physical therapy, and of course, eye doctors. And that's kind of his story, with all of that. And then leading up to it, Robin was a congenital heart baby. She was a blue baby back in the 70s and got one of the early open heart surgeries back when she was 4. Then in 2016, she had open heart surgery again for the valve replacement, following up from all of that. And because it's congenital heart defect, that was all done in the Children's Hospital. So she had the same nurses. She was in the same PICU that Andrew would eventually be in. And was on the 5th floor, just up above where he was, when he eventually would stay in there also for all of her recovery. And just the context of her family, Julia, our oldest daughter, oldest child, at 6 months old, she had a bacterial spinal meningitis down in New Orleans. The twins were a few months premature and were in the NICU in Vanderbilt for about a month as they were launching out into the world. And then on since that time, of course, had my heart attack not long ago, but still recovering from that. But that's kind of our life in the hospital. A lot of little things not mentioned in there that go along with it, but eventually just takes too long.
Yeah, I think if anybody is like me, you're listening to this condensed list and you're exhausted. You just hearing that, you think, oh my goodness, how are they sane? How are they still functioning? How are you alive? I mean, for most of us, our kids, well, I wasn't going to say that. But it's just, the whole thought of it is overwhelming. And I mean, I guess it's a mercy that when you start going into this process, when Andrew was first diagnosed, that you don't know that all of this is about to happen. I mean, as far as what you can describe or answer, when you first found out, I remember we were in seminary, because I remember sitting in that prayer meeting at First Pres Jackson and them telling us that he had been diagnosed, and just thinking, oh no, because I had a couple other friends whose kids had leukemia, and I sort of knew the longer process and what was about to happen. But how did you guys react? Your family, your other kids. I mean, that's a different reaction for mom, for dad, and then for the siblings. Because one of the things you said in your address to the presbytery that really hit me is just everything changes. It's not just one aspect of your life that just everything gets pulled upside down, uprooted, schedules, everything. So, I mean, as far as what you could describe to us about that, I mean, how did that happen, and what were the reactions from just different people in your family? Oh, we can't hear you.
You can't?
No, there you go.
Oh,
now
now
you're
I
back
can.
on. There you go.
I'll begin. And I grew up in Memphis, in the shadows of St. Jude, and my entire life we are in elementary school, in church, whatever it is, there would be a regular cycle, of either a family member, a new kid in class, and it's because somebody's got leukemia, or you would meet somebody and they have leukemia, so I'm growing up with leukemia, just in the backdrop my entire life. Never really knew anything in particular other than just how, bad, it is or supposed to be. None of the particulars. And so I know that right in the beginning, but that comment you made about just not knowing what lies ahead of you, for us, looking back, how so many things just were set in the first 28 days, because you get in, they diagnose you, and unlike every other thing in hospital life, it is immediate and constant. They begin treatment on him within hours. He has taken, chemotherapy, already in less than 8 hours. It's all in that same day. They are already treating him, and they are telling us that, maybe 7 to 10 days, within 2 weeks, he'll be home. Within about 7 days, they ought to have him, cleared. There's a real popular, which it's true. I don't want to imply that it's not true, but things that you don't quite understand until you're in it, is they talk about this 98% cure rate or remission, for leukemia. And that's true, but not true. That only means 98% of the patients within the first 2 weeks get initially clean, from the initial treatment right in the beginning. And but Andrew ended up being the 2% who failed the induction phase. The treatment goes through stages, and the first one's a 28-day. And so his 7 to 10 days was 42 days, the very first time, with everything. And so you don't know what's about to hit you. And you're glad that you don't, by any stretch, because what you do know is just overwhelming.
So I want to go back to the beginning a little bit, just to tell you how we knew he was sick or that sort of thing. So the story that we tell and how everything happened. He was playing baseball. He had gotten to the end of the baseball season, his first year playing baseball. He was 8 years old. And he had gotten sick, like running a really high fever, 104, that kind of thing. And I took him to his pediatrician, and they tested him for all these things, and he had strep. And so they gave him antibiotics for strep to treat it. We go home, a week-long regimen of the antibiotics. And after his antibiotics were over, he was still sick. He was still running a low-grade fever. He was super, super, super tired. And a few clues we had were he had bruising around his stomach area, and just a few bruises from getting hit by the baseball that didn't go away. And Perry initially goes, "Oh no, does he have leukemia?" I was like, no, he doesn't. But we got to the point where I needed to take him back to the doctor just to be checked again because he just felt so bad. And we were thinking, well, does he have mono? It was that kind of symptoms, like mono or something. And so I took him, it was on a Monday, June 2nd, took him back to the pediatrician, and our pediatrician wasn't there. So we had to see the other doctor that was there. And I told him what was going on. He checked him. They did a chest x-ray and ran blood work. And the doctor comes in with an envelope and he says, can you take him to Blair Batson right now? So that's the Children's Hospital. We are in Newton, which is about 45 minutes away. And I said, yes, I can. And I could tell that the doctor didn't want to alarm Andrew, but I mouthed to the doctor, do you think it's leukemia? And he said that they will check him out at the hospital and they would determine that. But yes, he did think it was. And so that was our, initial thing. And how it was so bad was Andrew said, I'm hungry. And because it was lunchtime, and I asked the doctor, could we stop and get him something to eat? And the doctor was like, go straight. And he said, he went to his personal office and got him something to drink and something to eat and handed it to Andrew so that we wouldn't have to stop. That's how bad it was. And then we drive and I'm calling everybody. I called Perry and said, we're on the way. It's probably leukemia. And you're hoping that it's not, but when you get in there in the ICU, they reran all the tests, blood work, chest x-ray, and these things. And the doctor comes in. I will never forget the oncologist that came in. She had 2 residents with her. They pulled us out into the hall where Andrew, wasn't hearing us at that point, and said that, I'm sorry, but he has leukemia. We have to admit him right now. And that's, I don't know, your heart drops, and we had to go in, and Perry pulled Andrew on his lap, and he was scared to death. He's 8 years old, and his daddy told him, you have cancer. And Andrew is a preacher's kid who has seen, church members, older people, whatever, that have had cancer and that have passed away. And he'll tell you he thought he was fixing to die, and so that's a hard thing to deal with, is having to talk to your child like that and have his whole world changed in a minute, with being told that he has cancer. So that's how all that came about. And one thing that really let us know, this was several weeks into being in the hospital, he was being treated and all this. Somebody comes into our room, and it is Make-A-Wish. It's the representative from Make-A-Wish. And that was when, for me, that I knew we are that family, that Make-A-Wish is coming to sign you up and let, your child make a wish. We're that family. Your child is someone who may not make it. He may, die, and you are getting granted a wish. So that was when it really hit me that, oh my goodness, we're that family.
That's a good example of the craziness with it. What she just talked about. One, Sarah, because I know you listened to the Grace Presbytery presentation I did. I mentioned that as well, but you just heard her talking about it. She doesn't know that. We hadn't discussed that, so she's bringing up the same thing. But then also, it was the first week. It was a matter of days. It was maybe 3 days later when they initially, came and started that. It was a few weeks later that we had our meeting, with somebody. But they came in and, asked you, put our name on the list, and do all of those things, with it. That backdrop with St. Jude in my life, Robin was talking about asking the doctor, about it being leukemia. A very common thing on just speaking of leukemia, because one of the things is you don't know what you don't know type of thing. And a lot of the writing that I did posting about Andrew really was about educating reporting aspects, but then also because I knew so many church people and pastors were following it, is, leukemia is nothing like tumor-based cancers, and almost everything's a tumor-based cancer, and how you get treated, things like remission. Like, many of our oncologists won't even use the word remission because of what people think that means, because of how it's applied in tumor, what everybody's used to. And so just a lot of those things were happening. But right there in the beginning, that sense of thinking maybe somebody has mono is just repeated over and over again. The process of they're sick and just wouldn't get over it, and over again, with all the families, that you get around talking together. But the thing here, and just in God's blessings and protection, for us. So we were set for the end of that month. So this is June 2nd, at the end of the month, we were flying over to make final arrangements and plans to move to the EPCW in the UK, and to take a year pastorate there at Kingston upon Hull, the church at Hull. Longtime pastor was retiring and was just in all that process. And I was at League Academy in an old office down at the football field, building a website and just doing all the work to launch that. And she, texts me and calls me about what's going on. And I told her, I said, refuse to leave until they answer you, is this about leukemia? Because doctors aren't going, they're going to try and protect and all that kind of deal. And just absolutely, because we had been dealing with him not getting better. And so right in that moment was the first time I saw these bruises that she was talking about. And it was just kind of right on, right in on his side. And I forget where the other one was, but the answers for them, because of what I grew up in, was why there was just, almost no doubt in my mind immediately, other than it was so mono-ish. I'd had mono, and he was just responding just like I was when I had it real bad in high school. But his answer was he got it swinging the bat. My mind's going, you can't bruise you can't do that swinging your bat. And I just said it out loud. Said, "Oh, great, he's got some kind of blood cancer." Because when I was growing up, that's always it. Bruises. And we had one of my Sunday school teachers, woman, taught me how to pray, doing my survival kit in Bartlett Baptist Church. Her son had died of leukemia, and it was while we were all in the youth group in junior high, and everybody kind of lived through that, and so all that's in the backdrop. And the scary thing for us is the only reason we sent him to the doctor, because it was summertime. I was absolutely convinced he had mono. So I did not want to waste any money going to the doctor and all the tests they were going to run for mono, to sit him in the bed for days on end, because that's all that was going to happen. But the pool was open, and I knew there was no way I could make him stay at home and in bed unless a doctor told him he was sick, because the girls, it was just summertime, and it was just literally, that's the only reason to send him to the doctor. And he was, at that point, his blood was, what percentage was it, Blas? Was it 60 something?
60 something.
60 something percent of his blood count was leukemia, cells. He was within days of, we were in days of being too late, with that. And so they tell us, they confirm it, and it's, straight out of the movies. For me, it was the scene in a war zone of shell shock. You can't hear anything, the adrenaline kicks in, everything just becomes myopic, just becoming so focused. And I felt myself doing it and still couldn't really stop it. But by the time Dr. Smith was going through and telling us everything, I caught myself. I was just within inches of her face, because I just kept going closer and closer and just closer, trying to listen to everything. You couldn't hear everything. And it It's like there was no noise whatsoever, and yet just so loud you couldn't even function. And because of the poor Andrew, and a preacher's kid, and then someone who is also just of the personality that I am, and no gentle parenting going on here in any way, shape, form, or fashion. And I had already made, because it's an hour and a half drive from our house, to the hospital, and so I'm making that drive, and I had already made up my mind that there was going to be no sugar coating, anything, and so no delaying, telling him no, this, and made my mind, and I told him, as we were sitting down, I said, because I'd always called him Little Man. That was a nickname my dad would use for young guys in sport and church. Hey, Little Man, stuff like that. And so I'd called him Little Man, his whole life. And I told him, I said, Little Man, I said, you actually have to become a man. You will no longer be a child. And that's how, we done saying, you've got cancer. It's called leukemia. And then we just began from there. Ooh. And then we called our church people. We got the kids sent to, their house, that's where they were going to be and stay. And then eventually, by the end of this long night, and we'll get to this pattern later, I go, and then that's when we tell, the kids. Our oldest knew something was probably wrong going on, didn't know what was going on, but a friend of hers had called her, communicated somehow by that time. But, they basically didn't find out until 8, 9 o'clock, that night, the first time.
And I think Julia, being the oldest, she kind of knew what cancer was and all that. She understood that more. The twins were 10, almost 11. 10. Is it 10, 11? It was 10, 11. Anyway, they will tell you now they didn't realize what was going on as much as Julia did. So maybe that was a blessing for them, actually.
Yeah, Julia was, you said she was like 13, 14?
She was 13. Mm-hmm.
About to go into 8th grade.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that because she was about to go into 8th grade. Then I remember the 4 years and then her going off to college and just still being in the midst of all of that. I'm going to probably ask the questions that people who, hear these kind of stories from people in their churches or people that they know are afraid to ask. And one of them is, how in the world do you tell your kids? How do you, you said you didn't sugarcoat it. You just went ahead and this is what it is. This is what is happening. But then also coming behind that, because you're a Christian, you're a pastor, one would think that you would be incredibly capable of handling this, but then in the moment, you're just every other parent who's in shock. But how do you tell your children or your child, look, you have cancer, your brother has cancer, this is serious, and then come behind that and say, this is where your hope is. It's, it may not be okay, and that's okay. This may not end well, but how do you strengthen? How did y'all parent your children and try to point them back to, I don't want y'all's faith to be wrecked by this. I'm trying to keep my faith intact by the little tiny string. How do you do that? Well, you must be on top of your mic again. We can't hear you. Nope.
It's showing.
Okay, now you're.
Oh, there it is.
There it is.
Okay. Yeah. Until you asked that question, I had not thought about this aspect of it. Robin and I have talked about this on raising the kids. First off, the answer is that we didn't. But one of the things that happened with us along the way, and one of the things I made a list of, the first things of just all the failures, that happened, in very real ways, things that we didn't pull off. But one of the things that happened because of, go back to that list and the journey that it was, is how much Robin was away. And as they got older, there's 3 girls, effectively being raised by a dad, who doesn't really have an ounce of girl dad, silly, giddy, in him, or gentleness, with them, type of thing. And so just the way that it works out, how removed from mama they were. But until you ask that question, I didn't even realize, I don't even know when Robin would even have had those conversations with them, because it was all me. Telling them and then explaining and then walking through it. In those days, you become so hospital isolated and dependent in treatment. At different times, nobody can really even be around you. In most of the places, the hospital floor is only the cancer patients at all. If you run a fever, you have to leave. Even as a patient, they send you to another floor sometimes, depending on, the deal, because you're just at such, risk. And so much of those conversations, was me, with them. I remember having them, especially in, the announcement, of it and explaining it. And, with them, it was, essentially a combination of bluntness and to the point, and education, and, explanation as far as what was going on. And again, this takes a life of its own. It changed over time of how much information, because they all grow all the way through it. But it's also, these questions we're going through will just kind of overlap with a lot of the answers go together. But in the surviving is also in how do you tell them and how do you raise them. There was one, significant element to it all, is the Lord's Day stability with it. And here, I'm not even talking about how do you watch TV, don't go to, I'm not even talking about the nuances of keeping the Lord's Day. I mean, whatever your view on the Lord's Day is Sunday worship. Always your life is evolved around, providential hindrance only. You're in church. And because of that, all of the key doctrines, even for 9-year-olds and an 8th grader, everything is in place about God being in control and carrying death and funerals, and all of these things are just already a part of their life. They're not isolated from them. And so you're able to talk about people, circumstances, things that have happened because of their just constant life in the church. It was not foreign to them. And I was able to use things that I knew they knew, to just to be able to talk about it, say, no, it's not like such and such, it's this or that sort of thing.
And I think too that our kids are not immune to tragedy. They had my mom passed away 3 years before Andrew was diagnosed. And that was very, very traumatic for all 4 of them. Obviously it was traumatic for me, but it, leaked into them. So, they know about people dying, getting sick and dying and that sort of thing. And I think it is very important, especially if you're at the age Andrew was. He's 8 years old. He's not stupid. These kids are not stupid. They know things. And I think it's very important you tell them straight up, you're very sick, but there are these treatments they're going to do. You're going to go through these things and have all these treatments, and the doctors are going to do their best to, get rid of the cancer in your body. And I think that those are some of the things Andrew and I talked about. And then telling the girls, your brother is really sick. This is he's really sick. This isn't, you're going to get well in a week or two, that kind of thing. And so I think it's very important that we are real with them, but also don't scare them to death, or something like that. But I think it is important. They're not stupid, and they know, from us, they feed off of us. And I just think it's important to tell them, once they're able to understand things, what's going on.
I did, tell them in that vein of, of educating, preparing, that type of thing, that, serious, very sick, very bad, could die, dying is, a reality, but that's not what thing is about to happen. And if, we just pretty much, it was just baked in the cake through direct communication. Again, the story changes over which year are you talking about and the extent of what were we saying. But the basic gist was, I'm going to tell you if he may die. You are not going to be, in the dark. And so, and then making sure we're communicating along the way in such a way that they believe us, that we don't, that we keep, the trust with them of, we say if he's okay or he's not, or, we just, and over time, you just developed ways of code words and phrases of how serious something is. Because I was teaching at the school. It was their school. Everybody in the community. It's a rural, small town, community county thing. Everybody, knows about it. We've been living there for a pretty decent little while when all this, popped up. And so we were also dealing with, they would hear, people could talk about it around them or talk to them. And so, we just, developed ways of assuring them if somebody is telling you something and it scares you, you can bank on it. It's not true, because, people are not going to know, if there's something actually serious, people are not going to know before you do, kind of thing. We just did just little things that you kind of figured out along the way.
I remember someone asked me and Sean, and I think it was just me, but, because we've got kids, pastors' kids, they go to up teen million funerals and weddings. And I mean, just everything that's a part of the life of the church, they're there because mom is playing the piano, dad is preaching, they're stuck sitting, in the service. And I remember someone asking me, if I thought it was harmful that my children were introduced to funerals. And I kind of just looked at him, and I didn't know how to answer the question at the time, kind of like, you just kind of freeze, like, well, that's a really stupid question, but I don't have a good answer for you, so I'm just going to stare at you awkwardly and stupidly. And it's welcome to most of my life. But, just thinking later, Sean and I talked about it later, of I'm glad kids are not, like you said, Robin, kids are not stupid. They need a frame of reference. They need I love what you said about the Lord's Day being the one constant in a week, in a life of just absolute stress and upheaval, that, being in church, that was a constant for your family. And being in church for your kids, like, they had a frame of reference for what was happening. They weren't immune or just completely, like, I've talked to parents who won't even say the word death around their children because they're so scared of it. And it's like, yeah, like you said, Robin, you don't want to terrify them, but also they've been introduced to this concept and you've had conversations with them before about what happens. Perry, didn't you have like a running blog or something where or in your journal, you keep it by the number of Lord's Days? I remember reading something like that. Oh, your mic is off again. There you go.
Because it says it's on.
There we go. Now you're back
and
on.
It's going. Yeah, something once it goes down. What it is. I started that because because of the thing with the UK. And another little side note, we had it arranged. Lucky was more than likely, because he was still on the right track at that time, and so May, I guess he was already licensed, or was potentially, you could be licensed or whatever. And so basically, he was going to fill in for me, for that year. And we were in the process of seeing if that was going to be the way we would do it or not. And so I was already set for him to come preach for me a couple of times, and one of the times, and then somebody else. And so I preached the first Sunday because it was the first Sunday, and we did that. And I may have preached for the first couple of weeks because we already had some time scheduled where I was going to be gone. And so I kind of finished out, then sat out, then came back in. And I think it was the second Lord's Day that I preached that I started it. But I counted the Lord's days. And in fact, it was this past June, and it's been very hard not to do it, but I've stopped counting them when we reached 10 years, which was this past June, the week of June 2nd. But that's what I did, was just counted the Lord's days. How many Lord's days has this, been? And so then I would change it, because I did it first through the initial treatment. Then I started Lord's Days of recovery. Then that turned into relapse. Then that turned into Lord's Days of bone marrow. And then I started over when he went into intensive care. Just at different times, it was a different counting of what it was. So many things that are pressures for, ministers and pastors' kids, but with the denial of reality that the modern world has become, I think our generation of ministry kids are just so far more blessed than even in years past, because they actually get to live in reality in a way that almost no kid does now. When they live in their virtual, sanitized world, they do not get reality. It's just, I taught 15 years in a private, privileged little school, and those kids are so clueless of just real life. And these are the good kids. We're not even talking about, bad kids. And so they're just exposed. I was laughing because I can just imagine how ugly you were wanting to be, because I know you. When the woman asked you, do you want, is it harmful to your kids? I can just imagine the brutality you were wanting to unleash on, that question.
I want to say something too on this, the Lord's Day and all that kind of stuff. Even Andrew and I weren't in church, when he was in the hospital and things like that. But every Sunday, Perry he was preaching most Sundays, even if, Andrew was in the hospital. The girls would go to church with him, and, we made sure we were all in church. You go to church just because mom's not there, or just because, I'm in the hospital with him or whatnot, they still went. And then the other thing is, when we were in the hospital, Andrew and I would turn on usually First Pres with David Strain. We would listen to him, on Sunday morning. And sometimes while we were listening, the doctors would come in and they were, which church are you listening to or whatnot, and stuff like that. But I made sure that we did something on Sunday. I wouldn't let him just sit there and not have that Sunday worship. And he remembers that. He'll tell you what we listened to, while he was in the hospital. Also, we didn't allow, unless Andrew was sick at home, when we were at home, if Andrew was sick or if he was immunocompromised where he didn't need to be around people, we would stay at home. But otherwise, he would go to church on chemo. One day, I had to give him chemo at home through an IV at church, because it was a certain time you had to give it to him. And so I just went into Perry's office and gave him chemo, and then we went to the worship service. And so, I just encourage anyone who's going through this to do your best. If you're go to church, let the Lord, feed your soul at that point, because you're going through so much. But go to church. Don't, to me, it seems like sometimes a pity party when you're going through something like this a little bit. You're poor me, poor us. Get up and go, that kind of thing. And I encourage people who are going through times of really big trials like this to keep going.
Yeah, and to keep short accounts. When you're asking how you survive and you're going through that sort of deal, that story just made me think about the reality of, what are some of the, the spiritual challenges to your heart. And, the conversation, for many good reasons, usually focuses towards things that'll be wrapped around, falling, some kind of addiction, sex, adultery, whatever, the different things may be. But reality is, for all those conversations, as people refer to, the slow fade, the small decisions, those different things, rarely does something catastrophic happen to someone who's walking faithfully all of a sudden, just trip and, oh my gosh, I fell into a ditch full of sin. You take a left turn and then a right turn, then you get off an exit, then you switch carts and get onto a bus that takes you there. I mean, it's a lot of decisions before you get there, and sort of thing. But, it does get hard, to be and remain gentle and empathetic internally when you are literally giving chemo in the pastor's study for a kid to go out to go to church, to self-described pity parties, with other people, and
yes,
having a sprained ankle, missing a ball game, missing a vacation because you're sick, just these great catastrophes in life. It is hard not to genuinely be nothing short of sinful, towards people, internally, because, it actually gets easier over time, because you really do, in our situation went so long, you really do actually end up where you're, hard to be gentle. You end up becoming, Robin, I know it's going to be hard for you to believe, but, Robin will sometimes say, I'm just way too nice.
Really?
Because because one of these situations up, people are talking about it, whatever's going on. And I'll be, now, honey, they've never, you just really don't, but that overall thing of, Bebo, and he's not the first one to ever say it, but, it's never right to do wrong. Little, ethical, little, mantra there. And so, the key doctrines that get you going all the way through, one of them is a true understanding of sanctification. And one of the things that I had to delete, on Facebook was a post. Remember, this is 2014. So we're in the height of the beginning. It was just a couple of years before that, GRN is starting, where, the sanctification discussion is in full bloom, at this point, and all the debates. And I can't remember, something from GRN was put up, on the Facebook in a reference to something. And in response to it, I'm up there in the hospital. It's in the first, maybe even that first month. and I just unload, on Facebook about some of the weak sanctification discussions, that were going on because we were living it, and
Yes.
this whole, excusing sin, it's anger, just whatever it is, excusing my sin because I'm going through, something bad. And of course, nobody ever says that bluntly. It's always nuanced. It's the rationalization of sin because of a hard time and understand, those sorts of things. But knowing all that before going in and being in the midst of it and just recognizing, you have to fight your sin, because if you don't, who knows where you're going to end up when you're going, through this. And that intentionality of repent quickly, repent often, and name these sins and understand there is no excuse, for your weakness.
Wow. That kind of transition us really well into, how your community, your church community, friends, basically maybe physical community came alongside y'all. And there's two different aspects to this that I want to consider with, the time that we have left. And that is, how did people encourage you? And then the second one is, what were the practical needs that were met? Because a lot of times this happens. And I mean, I remember reading this. Well, I remember being there a little bit, but most of it was from me reading this when we were in Virginia and keeping up with the updates and reading everything and going, you just feel so helpless and dumb. And like, there's nothing that I can do. And I have all of this sympathy and I'm praying for these people, and I don't really know how to let them know. And would it even matter? And would they even care? And a lot of people feel very, very helpless as to, what even does encourage. And then, so let's talk about the encouragement part, because then we're always afraid, to say the wrong thing. What if you say something really dumb and it just, and then you just set somebody off? So, as far as what was actually helpful, for, emotional, spiritual encouragement, and then we'll get into the more, physical, practical ways of service later.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you for
There we
doing
go.
that.
I'm going to do some overall caveats that are just kind of general for it, then let her hit on it. One, everyone is different, but the general needs do transfer. Details will be different. Personalities are different. Spiritual maturity will be different. All these things in life stages of their family are different. And so, and that's just important, because what works for one won't work for another, just because things are so different between people. But the overall kind of general thing does transfer. Pastoral and spiritual care that happens, and I do separate that for a different conversation. Pastoral care can only be given by pastors. Spiritual care, means word and sacrament is something distinct, and it needs to be absolutely both. And it needs to be more spiritual care from people than even from, the pastors. We may get through because of about 5 distinct moments of pastoral care out of all of this time. And then thousands upon thousands of just spiritual care from brothers and sisters in Christ. So it's distinct, but it's got to be both. But it's no different. There's nothing different about how you care. It's all the same thing, all the same rules. You try and watch this conversation or that, don't give advice on how to find treatment, that sort of thing. Just these different things. But it's just greater. It's just a greater intensity. It's just a greater urgency, but it's also that deal of the long-term time, with it. And then just don't try to solve anything. You cannot fix any of this, which is true all the time, but you can kind of fake it with a lot of other things. People, But once a friend of mine had a friend that had adult leukemia, and just lagniappe here, there's virtually almost no similarity of adult leukemia and children's leukemia. Even not to even make a comment of, it's in the blood. That's, I mean, the treatments are different, the danger, it's just so different. There's so much of it. But he had a buddy that had it, and I told him that, and his buddy made a comment to him. He said, well, the doctor said, and they're pretty positive, but I mean, they could just be being, happy, just trying to be positive with me. And he goes, and he responded to him. He goes, well, Brother Perry, and was talking about all that. And he said, I can promise you, when you get in this worm, they don't get positive about nothing. I said, they just tell you what it is. Those doctors don't care anymore. They just, and that's just, that intensity is there. You can't fix it. And so all you can do is provide comfort, help with some things, and just be there. So don't worry about it. Don't, I'm not going to say you can't say anything that's going to hurt them or bother them, because that can happen.
Yeah.
But I don't recall that ever happening with anybody that was faithful in church, that was around these different things. And then the only people that really said things that were just dumb, as far as, the Bible, theology, and doctrine, but, they weren't Reformed and Presbyterian. And so, I mean, it was okay. Your people are going to be okay. And so with that, the practical needs, just know that they are massive, they are constant, and they are cumulative. And the people don't even know what it is that they're going to need, and it's just going to stay constant. So just be ready and, and available. Relational, emotional needs, they are incomprehensible, and people don't even know what it is that they need and how bad they need it. And the spiritual danger is urgent, and it's constant, and it's cumulative. And so just knowing that that's what the distinction is, that everything else is just as you care, for everybody anyways. It's just know that that's what's going on. But.
So I think that the biggest encouragement for me, especially the mom sitting there 24/7 in the hospital trying to take care of my child, was use Facebook, social media to your advantage in that way, that you get out all the information you can for people to pray for him. And we are Christians. I'm from South Mississippi. I'm Baptist, families, Baptist, friends are Baptist, stuff. And I could send those updates, and I would read. I told everyone on Facebook that I read every single message, even if I didn't respond to every single person or every single message, but I read those, and it was so encouraging. Even if it's, we love you, we're praying for you, we love Andrew, we're, just anybody saying that. And I read every single person that said that. And that was, to me, encouraging. It was, made you feel good that people were praying, even if not every single person, that said they're going to pray, prayed. You would get X amount that were praying. So that was a good thing. To me, that was just really encouraging. Also, if you know the person, if you have their personal phone number or whatever, to text, was a big deal. For me, getting those texts, not always calls if you're in the hospital, because it's hard, to answer the phone. But texting me was very, very encouraging. So I had some women in the church or people that would text me just little notes or little Bible verses or whatever. Well, that was very encouraging. Those are, to me, just those practical things that you need, encouragement during those times.
I made a list, here, like general things are encouraging. So visits and contacts, and see, all these things were things you just think. Availability to help with things that are very specific. Like for us, it broke down help with the kids, with the pets, just that sort of thing. Errands, yard work. But I had in here social media engagement. That is a part of the new world and how we communicate. And what I mean by that is, I have often wondered, how did people survive without texting, let alone phones and calls, just without texting. But then also the social media, and just began to just realize, it became a pattern. It was over so long. People would like, people would follow, people would share. You would figure out which ones, were which. And then when it was bad, it was amazing because we kind of have a certain amount of engagement through the normal things. Mm-hmm. And then, you're kind of, not feeling isolated or let down or, ignored or anything, but you just realize, we're in a steady thing. You're starting to feel comfortable about it. So people are feeling comfortable. And then there'd be whatever. Then there would be that post. And just the number of people just come out of the woodworks. And I know for me, I would, we'd read every message, but I would read every name, with the likes, that would respond. And the thing that was just, I feel silly even talking about it, but just how profoundly encouraging it was, that old guy that doesn't even look like he even knows what the phrase smartphone means, who you never, ever see whatsoever on the social media, in social life, in, anything, is responding, when you go through that and you see those names, and it is real encouraging. The financial needs, big and small, type of things. And when this happens, you either have a relationship with the people or you don't. Mm-hmm. And so respond, according to that. Just because you occasionally send a note or a text doesn't mean you're not engaging because you didn't send text messages before. So don't try and make the relationship something that it wasn't. Respond with just what is normal, because both of those things, the constant, in-depth communication is huge, as well as, oh my gosh, I can't believe Bob asked, about, whatever it is, it's the whole gamut that is all significantly encouraging as you go along. And then what we experience going through, of course, I knew David before Andrew was diagnosed, before he was he was David Strain before he ever came to First Pres. We had met through our D-men together. And so then he came, and then he was in, his role, and, wasn't quite as important, so we spent time together, all those kinds of things. And then he's diagnosed, and he hadn't been pastor all that long. And I saw the recording of this. I think he referred to me as, pastor in the Presbytery, a dear friend of mine, and goes in and makes the announcement. The ladies at First Pres, their pastor's dear friend, his kid, and you would have thought that I was a lifelong Jacksonian, they came out of the woodworks, and so remember, over a calendar year's worth of admission days, within a week, every Monday through Friday, they fed Robin. Ralph Kelly jumped in immediately. We were discussing. I came up with, the thought of, we need to get her some healthy food. Sometimes Nan Kip with the women in the church and Barb Curry, all of a sudden, boom, Monday through Friday, almost the entirety, there was lunch brought, to Robin, in some way. And almost every one of them strangers. And, one of the things you experience going through it is this reality. Andrew is a Make-A-Wish kid with a very real threat of death. And the number of people who we only know because they cared for us in the hospital who are now dead. Andrew's alive, but they are dead. And Barb Curry, she was real good with art, being, in Jackson and Mississippi. And so she did calligraphy with Isaiah 41:10, Andrew's verse. And, I look at it daily. I have it set in our house, and we've got a little table, and I put it in a specific place. I don't even have to look for it. If I look up, it's in my straight line of, thought and, sight. And you can see that and recognize, that. But there very early on, she was lost, to it, just as we were beginning to know. And there's some other people who our entire relationship exists only because they started visiting us in the hospital, because of Andrew. But we're now in a point in our lives that we can't even imagine life without them. And it's just, through every aspect of our lives. And so it's just relational, and it's organic, and it's just kind of, normal, things that you would do and go through. And just the things, just the blessings that are just overwhelming throughout going through these things. So I'm talking about, Barnes, she loses her life. There's another family, the Watts family, and they get in, and Andrew's Mississippi State, Sue is all Ole Miss, and they both love baseball. And so it's just constant. And, he's, 8, turning 9 and 10 during this time. She acts like she's about 7. And so they get, just perfect together, just fighting constantly. But her husband, loses his battles with mental health. And now Barb's husband, Ned, and Sue are married. And so those two families, because they were all part of, First Pres together, they both, in those first 2 years, they suffer that. And a few years, later, then, they're together, and they're still the essential part. They're the cards that are on, our refrigerator as, every Christmas, when you get those things. And it's just that constant reality of the organic communion, connectional nature, of, the church, and the immediate bonds that you make and that you grow through Christ, through the sufferings, through the graces and the blessings, that you're actually just living it all out. And mutual comfort, mutual life, mutual, living. Nan, Kip, his husband Crane, ruling out at First Pres as well. They're responding in the beginning, and it takes time before and find out. They had lost their daughter with a 10-year battle with brain cancer, and they were very involved in multiple layers of ministries that are to the patients there at the time. Things have changed in the way they do it, but at that time, you had your payments made for parking, at Batson. And that was all through the candlelighters, which is a thing that they were driving and a part of, and just watched over the years. It's not a ministry. They do ministry in their church, and this is how, they respond. And so it's just, it's just constant from every direction, but we're pastors. Family and ministry and all that sort of thing in our lives. And most people don't have that from multiple sources and places. And so this idea of the serious illness in the church is when it's in your church, when it lands in your jurisdiction, you need to understand, if you hear our story, that the majority of the people were not getting near the attention that we were getting, even when they were in church and getting a lot of attention. They were only getting it from 1 or 2 sources, where we were getting it from an entire church community over multiple denominations and things, just the nature of, our public life. And so that recognizing you got to get in the game when it lands in your lap, in your jurisdiction, as a church.
So given the, oh no, sorry, Robin, you go ahead.
I was going to talk a little bit about the women in the church that brought me the lunches. That was, I try to find blessings in these things that we go through. And to me, that's one of the biggest blessings that I got, not just from bringing me a lunch that I needed or whatever, but meeting these women. It was mostly, women in the church. Nan would ask, she would coordinate it for 5 days. She would give me a list of the women that were going to come. And, a lot of times it was the same ones over a week, over 2 weeks or whatnot. It would be the same women. And then it would be new ones sporadically coming in. And I would meet so many different people that I still communicate with, that when something happens, I'll text them and say, can you pray this way or that way? And it's been very, very encouraging. And that is a very practical thing that you can do for someone if you know they're going to be in the hospital for days on end or whatnot, that you can bring them a lunch or something, ask them what they would like or whatever, something like that. And then also, Andrew got in on all this too. Like Perry said, he and Sue would talk, and it was a way for us to know those people in Jackson, because we haven't said this, but we lived, our church is an hour and 20 minutes from Jackson. So, it wasn't as easy for our church members to come and do some of those practical things like that. They could do take care of our house or the girls at home or our animals or those sorts of things. But in Jackson, we had First Pres and some of the other churches, Pear Orchard, and different people coming from those other churches that would help in some of those practical ways.
I was in a larger church. I don't know necessarily if we could have made it, but the level of stability, security, safety, and protection that I had because of Carolina Presbyterian Church and the leaders there and the women there and what they did, just my life away from the hospital was almost never anything on my mind.
Wow.
It was I didn't ask for my schedule. I didn't have to, am I going to preach or not going to preach? Was simply, am I going to preach or am I not going to preach? There was the support, the freedom, the safety, it was incalculable. When she was talking about one of the things I want to add on how do you help and be an encouragement is you need to let the people define how you help them, but be proactive in seeking it. And, ask, do you want me to mow your yard? Do you want me to do this? Do you need this? But let them tell you yes or no. And, everybody wants to, let's surprise them with this. And when you are in serious, long-term, chronic, illness like this, there was a surprise or two here or there that just made for some of the worst moments and situations because it blew up our lives. And your life is hanging on a thread, and especially if it's something that breaks into privacy, personal space, that sort of thing. I mean, just mowing somebody's yard, that can be a great surprise, kind of thing. But there can be some things, if people need help with their kids, do what they want you to do with their kids. If it's keep them or it's to take them here or do this, because you don't know why. And that's the thing. You don't know what you don't know. And so typically you come in with some kind of help and you just, you want to help and you want to surprise and that sort of thing. The reason they're needing the help often, especially if they're actually asking for it, then that typically means there's some kind of problem. There's something going on. And especially Sarah, you read so much, so you'll appreciate this, but I was very intentional about being very transparent and writing just very, very, very openly. There are things people will never know.
Right.
As transparent as we are, the worst wasn't shared.
Right.
And so, and most people are not going to be as transparent as we were, about it all. And so just always understand you don't know how bad it is, even when you're being told it's bad. And so you don't know what's in the kitchen, that you can't see. And so that's why, be proactive and you're asking for the things. And then when people say yes, let them tell you how, and then do it that way. Because you never know. Most of the time it won't matter, but sometimes it really will. And so, that's just a way to just make it simple and don't add stress.
Oh gosh,
You know,
no.
you change and it adds stress. And and then you need distractions. And so, the comfort, everybody's gifted. The Lord gifts the church for the different reasons, the different offices, the different ministries, and the different ways. And everybody just needs to be them. Be who you're supposed to be in the church, whatever it is. Because I got this long list here that's dealing with the pastors that were involved, elders that were involved, the diaconate was on. There was so much elder and women's ministry, particularly with First Pres Jackson in town, but Pear Orchard was just complete opposite of the diaconate, just doing all these deacon things, And it took a little while before I realized, well, the deacons are doing that, because we know some of the people. But of course, David, pastorally, we were blessed, the whole England thing, we ended up being in the hospital that entire month when we first diagnosed. And that entire month, every single person we had an intimate relationship with to do the work in England were in America and were in Jackson, and for at least a week. Ian was here for one of his stints with Second Pres and Yazoo. When all the guys would go up and have their little pastoral, session, with Ian, we go up there on Sunday nights. That was during this time. And so he would visit, Andrew on a regular basis, and us, of course, just regular membership, personal one-on-ones. But, for me, there's also this element of including the people in their lives. And again, people are going to be different, but I've got, you hear about band of brothers and, and all that kind of stuff, and, company of pastors and things. I've got, I've got, a few of those, and I've got mine, and I've got one group, which, sounds affectionate, refer to themselves as, Perry. But that was a name, that was come up with actually to annoy me, not actually to be an encouragement.
Wait, what was the name? You cut out
Perry,
when you said the name of the name.
Perry's People. It's kind of like a little
Gotcha.
self-titled, kind of little group. Now I've got a different name of affection that I use for each of them.
Don't say
But with all seriousness, there's a little period in time, because like leukemia, it just changes everything. And for us in ministry, Robin got over England pretty darn quick. I still haven't gotten over it. And that's not an exaggeration, and one of the things for me is watching that group live. Graduating, getting ordained, having babies, moving literally all over the world, and just living through them, watching them. I would post pictures of the clocks in the hospital.
Yeah.
That started the first 24 hours. You lose total track of time. They had these digital clocks all over Batson. And at some point I looked at one and I realized it was the next day, and so there's this aspect of inside that hospital, it is a complete separate world. And, thriving and living and having life and being connected to that through others is the motivation, is the encouragement. For Andrew, it was his buddies, for us, family, it was the kids at school, there's just all kinds of different sources, of it. But that just becomes that mutual encouragement and life together that, it's the encouragement comes from the most unlikely and unbelievable and never dreamt of sources of being comfort.
We thought you weren't going to talk about Sean this much, but
no.
Oh, I wasn't. Well, to his defense, he's actually in two different groups. One of them is Perry's People. Another one is called Perry's Thorn.
Definitely
he is actually in both of those groups.
For some of us, I don't know if I assume you're somewhat of the same way, but there's just when you've got just the heaviness of everything, and maybe it's a more male response, but you need to be able to just lighten up every once in a while and make dumb jokes and insult each other, and just that sort of sense of normalcy comes back. And it's like, this guy's got a kid with leukemia and we're sending him dumb jokes and insults, and you're like, what is wrong with you people? But at the same time, you got it. If you know somebody, you know somebody. And I don't know, that it's encouragement doesn't always look the same for every single person. I will say, I guess I could say it like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't encourage anybody to send anyone the things that I would receive from the juvenile friends in my life.
Oh, they are. I know those people.
They're the 6 people that listen to this show. So
oh no. As we're about to wrap up, but one of the things that I wanted to touch on that really impacted me when I was listening to the Presbytery address was Perry said something about, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's a lie. I think his exact words were, it beats you and it beats you and it beats you and it beats you. And just for those surrounding a family, it's the long haul. It is years. It's longer than a decade sometimes. And some people in your church are going to get fatigued from it all. Obviously you guys are fatigued beyond fatigued from it all. But it's just that commitment to being with somebody for the long haul and recognizing that with, as you educate, that was one of the other things that Perry said that I thought, yes, educate yourself, read on it, know what they're talking about, read their post, figure out what's going on as much as possible, so you know what they're dealing with as much as possible. But then realize that it's not just magically better if it's over. It's just like, oh, okay, well, we're done with the leukemia, so he's better, everything's good, okay, we're done now. No. And some diseases, it is more like that. With Andrew's particular case, I don't know, I read the list of everything that he is struggling with, and he's 18, and I remember myself at 18 and thinking, imagining the life that he thought he was going to have and trying to deal with the reality that he has now. Doing that as an 18-year-old is incredibly difficult. Those words sound even dumb and just not enough saying incredibly difficult, but then thinking of that as a parent and watching your son have to go through that acceptance, and just realizing that your community, the people who love you, this is the long haul. It doesn't stop with when you're out of the hospital, because this is going to be the rest of Andrew's life is complications from this disease. And so any comments that you guys, any last comments on that? Nope. Try it again.
Hearing me?
Yep. Okay, here we go.
There we go. Early on, I made the comment often, and this was based on being trained, because when you got leukemia, they literally train you. The nurse comes in, sits with chemo nurse would sit with Robin, pretty much about an hour a day, going through a 3-inch 3-ring binder, going through everything. This is what you're gonna have to do. This is what this means. This is what this means. You're just going through. So you're being trained on these things. And so, Andrew was, 8.5 when he was diagnosed. And I used to talk about how he was, if you're gonna have this in your life, we have him pretty much at the perfect age, because he wasn't old enough for the hormones, which would make the treatments worse and more complicated. He was old enough that he could say, my stomach hurts, my head hurts. He wasn't a baby where he couldn't communicate what was wrong. He was old enough that we could tell him, you've got cancer, you got sick, you got to take medicine or it's serious. He was young enough. He didn't have abstract thought. It was just, if he could go down the hallway to the playroom, then he was more or less fine when he was in the hospital in the grand scheme of things. Whereas the teenagers never left their rooms. They knew exactly what they weren't getting to do. At that age, whatever he couldn't do because of leukemia, he wasn't going to get to do anyways. And he wasn't doing beforehand. And so kind of had a moment there. And then his life was, at that point in time, it was all Leak Academy, and it was all football, and it was all, am I going to be able to play football when I'm in junior high? And that was the deal. And the doctors, you're maybe 7th grade, 8th grade for sure. By the time you're 8th grade, you're going to be, in this, that, and the other. And then he's in 6th grade when he relapses. And from then on, it becomes a steady routine, a steady routine of every dream, virtually. And I'll go ahead and say every dream. As a kid that was going away, one by one would eventually got taken away. And so now the dreams that he has now are actually already new. Some of them are connected to the old dreams, but they're new ones. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason of the living suffering is because of the blessing of living, like I call it the blessing of shattered, dreams from his shattered ankles. He has shattered ankles because they kept him alive. And with the leukemia patients, particularly avascular necrosis, they're trying to figure out what to do or you can do, because it's kind of a new problem at this level because they're saving more kids. Typically there was a little period that he hit with his problem, and they refer to him as the one that lived. Because normally you die. And so, but he lived. And so now he has this problem because to keep him alive, they're basically killing them over and over again, doing everything but kill them in order to keep them alive. As a side note, because almost no national funding goes to pediatric cancer research. It's the smallest slice of the pie. Everything is for adults. And so the treatment, they got the magic bullet back in the 90s, and, they just kind of keep going through it no matter how hard the doctors fight. There's just not the research there to do it, although it's all getting better. But that amount of radiation, that amount of chemo, that amount of steroids is the magic bullet in saving them. And then that destroys your bones. And so you live. And so all those dreams are over. And then that's just kind of what everything just constantly is. And then all of a sudden everybody's out of school and they're moving through life, and you're trying to figure out what you can and can't do, in his particular case. Now, this is the one thing, most things he's had, if you had leukemia, you've gotten the version of it. It's not like Andrew's worse than somebody else, but he is experiencing something that most survive don't, because he just has so much of it, and then extra little complications, through it. And we're just trying to figure, we don't have any idea. We, our constant lives, every single decision, eventually we'll be in deep conversations, and then we'll just stop because it'll be, we're not far enough along yet. We don't know if you can or not. We don't know if we can. We don't know if he can or not. Oh, we're getting close. But not yet. We don't know.
I have some thoughts as we're closing talking about this is I thought the hardest part was him being diagnosed, and really you get to that hard part after he had his bone marrow transplant. Yeah. We've basically, with all the radiation, with all the chemo, I mean, you have done some stuff to him that there's no going back from. There's none. Your child he talks about it a lot. He wants to be a dad. He's probably not ever going to be able to, unless God were to intervene, and that would be, one of those miracles. And so it's things like that. And he has asthma still. Being on the vent has caused his lungs, even now, not to be as, good as they were before all that. Those are worries from a daily basis almost that, I have PTSD from. He's got cataracts. He got them a couple of years ago.
A good example of what she's talking about is found himself in a situation, fun and games and everything that's just normal, football game, and ended up having to sleep on the floor, in their hotel, his family, everything's fine, but, sleeping on the floor that night. And that immediate reality of what just anybody else, can do, living on the nasty hotel floor could kill him. So if he gets the wrong thing in the wrong way, the wrong time with his lung and his condition, he may not recover. And he's just going through life.
Yeah.
And he just, so he's going to be nice. I'm going to be the one who sleeps on the floor, and that's just how it just goes.
He also has to be careful with what he eats, because he has had this where he eats something wrong and he can get what would not hurt us hurts him, and he goes back into the hospital for dehydration and whatnot. So those are things that we have to deal with on a daily basis. And I wanted to mention too, don't forget about the older kids as time has gone on. All of his sisters are in college. We're trying to get them through. They're trying to launch, if you will. But they still have issues as well. We've got a couple of them who they probably would be this way anyway, hypochondriacs. But I think because of what Andrew has been through, the least little thing, and one of them is I'm dying of hit her head and I'm a brain bleed, or I have a brain tumor or something. And you have to really, you kind of laugh about it or whatever, but this one is serious. You know what I mean? Like really serious. And you have to be like, listen to me, honey, you are fine. You are not going to die. You don't have, whatever it is, an infection or whatever, even if it's a cold or the flu or whatever, you're not going to die. You're okay. And that is a constant thing that we're having to do now with those girls, is they are very worried about themselves too. Can I get sick?
And now that they're older, you have to prove that they're okay. Yeah. You're okay, because if this was a problem, this would be happening, this would be happening, that would be happening. It's
not a just trust because I said so, trust me thing. Yeah.
Right. Not 12 anymore. You can't just do it. And then all through this, it touches you. It goes on and on and on forever. The entirety of this time, our oldest is autistic and we don't know it. She's undiagnosed and untreated. And then it takes her entirety in college before we actually get her diagnosed, because she has her being the oldest. And in her senior year, when he goes down and almost dies, and no one, mama, and at 18 is when these things start manifesting themselves. And so she's going through all of this with significant, mental health, mental illness, undiagnosed, untreated, and then as reach into adult life, trying to go through it, you think you've got it diagnosed or whatnot, and the layers have to go through years of getting better before you can find out the real underlying, issue, because it was, such a trauma, that's with it. And so it's just, it's a bomb that goes off, and, the first wave is you trying to, survive and live. And then after that, then you have to learn how to live and try and do that in such a way that you're normal, that you're functioning, and that, you're not bitter, you're not hanging out, you're not, being isolated, you don't isolate yourself.
Right.
And it'll affect different people in different ways. For me, some of the things in my life, teaching in that school, at Leak Academy, was just the overwhelming, as far as my adult life, there's a little period there is probably the most fun that I have had as a grown person, was just my life in the field where I'm at. But there are pieces to that puzzle now, not as bad as 2 or 3 years ago. But, if I get in my vehicle and I go somewhere, I am going to see his crushed dreams. I am going to see what he was supposed to be, doing. Now he's gotten old enough. It's a little bit not as bad. I ended up leaving, the school and teaching because it was just pure misery to be there, where it used to be one of the greatest sources of my joy and strength became the worst because his class ended up on my hallway. And so every day I was watching his class walk by my door. When I was in the field house or on the field, I was watching his class, suited up, and it was just pure. It was the worst part for me throughout the entirety of everything, that was. But for him, it remained the source. And so fortunately, he got healthy enough, because for a little bit, I would have to take him to the school. He was the manager. Even though he wasn't in the school, they treated him as he was. He basically grew up like a coach's kid there. And they just took him in. He got to be involved in everything. But he was in such a health condition. Of course, nobody knew how bad he was, but we did. I had to be there. But then eventually I didn't. And I stopped being, and then he got to have his life. He got to have a little bit of a life, kind of like the last year or so that he would have been in school, because reached the point that I didn't have to be with him. But that's just an example of nobody would have any earthly idea. I've told very few people, that story. And like I said, this is at the end of a long podcast, so nobody's going to really hear it. But it's, I don't even know how to describe that part of it for me. And then, so the thing that everybody needs to know is everybody else is going through it has got their version of that, whatever it is. And it may actually, for other people, it might end up being church itself. For some, you don't have any, I would have never told you a year before this started happening that place would ever be anything. I couldn't even imagine leaving it, it had become so much a part, of my life and, what I was doing. And then it became, I don't know how I'm going to get through each day that I'm, teaching here.
I'm just going to say, I just want to say one thing. He lived. Andrew lived. We are thankful. We are blessed. There are so many blessings. We could sit here all day and talk about all these things that we went through, that happened, positive, negative, and all that kind of stuff. But he lived. He is doing well, even though there are challenges to every single day. The girls are doing well. We are, pushing through and moving through. And my biggest prayer at this point is at some point Andrew will be able to come on a podcast, whether it's you guys or some other talk or go give his testimony of his side of the story. I want everybody to hear that. That is gonna, that's my biggest thing with him, is to get him able to tell the story, tell his story. So
yeah, every week there's not a week that goes by. There are multiple prayers that I have, give, and send out to minor league and major league baseball players at this point. That is one of the favorite parts of my life and routine. And if Andrew hadn't had leukemia, then that wouldn't be a part of our lives. And it's just through Mississippi State baseball program. And Andrew himself, on the senior night for a particular class that was graduating and leaving. He made a video for them. And we're traveling back and forth to Mississippi State baseball games. And I asked him one time after these things set in with his ankles, would you give all this up, to have your ankles? And he didn't answer immediately. And then I told him, I said, yeah, that's it's weird. He goes, yeah. He goes, you think that'd be easy to answer? And then we were just quiet. We were driving. He said, if I could go back and never have leukemia at all, I'd give everything up. But if it was just to have my ankles back, and one of the players' nickname is Mule, he goes, I couldn't give up Mule. I said, I couldn't give up Mississippi State.
Wow.
I can walk. I can learn to deal. I can deal with the pain. But if I could if I could never have leukemia and none of it, I'd give everything and everyone up, I knew. But if it was only to get my ankles back, I wouldn't give up. They called them the Diamond Dogs, but I couldn't give up. The Diamond Dogs, and those are just the things that happened. And that was simply a ruling elder at First Church in Madison here. Didn't know us from Adams, only following us. Andrew relapses, calls the baseball office at Mississippi State and says, kid, bone marrow, loves Mississippi State, Jake Mangum. Coach Lemonis is the new coach. Jake's in there. They send him a letter. And then the rest just ends up being history. And now, Andrew will tell you, his best friend is, Coach Lemonis, and he calls him on a regular basis, even now, and communicate. I try to get a hold of him. I may hear from him, in a week or two. Andrew texts him and he calls immediately or texts him immediately. Or if he can't, he calls him the next day and apologizes for not, getting back to him quicker, because they're just that close. And so, the blessings are overwhelming. They're just, we aren't who we are without going through it. And the joys that are in our life simply do not exist without the suffering that's in our lives. And it just simply cannot imagine our lives without the blessings that have come, through all this. Just don't even know, what it would be, without the people, without the experiences, without the events, and it just goes on and on and on. Stories that we can tell that are similar to, just the way this thing with Mississippi State, baseball came about. For all of them, for all of us.
Well, just, I don't even know how to put into words, but watching y'all, at least with the social media updates, and, knowing, Perry, knowing you in person a little bit through Sean, and just seeing y'all, how you guys handled this, at least publicly, was an immense encouragement. And just how, but you all were so, one of the things I remember about a lot of your posts was I remember reading through all of the very detailed medical terminology and getting an absolute education in leukemia. Holy cow. There was a lot, and thinking there's so much that's not even being said here. But the other thing was just watching y'all be steady and steadfast. And I'm sure you didn't feel like that a lot of times. But the public witness and how y'all handled yourself online was just, these parents are dealing with every worst nightmare of any parent. And you guys still pointed us to Jesus, and you still had hope, and you still, I don't know how to commend you for that. I don't even know if it even sounds encouraging now, but it just, I remember being blown away as to how can they put sentences together at this point, only maybe as a way of processing things. But I just remember being very impressed and encouraged and thinking, I need to learn from these people. Like, these are real people. These are real solid. I know you guys are shaking your head, but
it's adrenaline.
You don't see it.
Yeah.
You just don't see it very often.
Yeah. I mean, it was. I mean, I'm being so much of it. How do you get through? It is
adrenaline.
God's design of your body was adrenaline, because it actually, one of the difficulties was trying to learn how to live without adrenaline. I mean, you're not conscious that it's adrenaline. This is just something, hindsight's 2020. Yeah. All of a sudden you're trying to function on a daily routine basis without the adrenaline of life is in the balance. And you start wondering kind of what's wrong with you. Why can't you? And you just kind of realize, because we are trained, because we're in ministry, I finally kind of put two and two together. Oh, it's the adrenaline's gone, and there really was. There was so much of the being on campus, going out with the guys, being at GA, whatever it would be. There's just adrenaline in you, and you're just kind of functioning, and you're just clueless of how bad off you are. You're really
you don't
clueless.
Really recognize that till later.
That's a blessing right there.
Yeah, you just don't know.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you rip somebody's head off, and but then Andrew, at some point, because he grows up, I had to bring donuts and pizza often to the nurses' station and to the doctors. Well, not often, but sometimes I just do it to do it. But especially if I showed up one time with a bunch of donuts, and Andrew looked at me and goes, "What did you do?" And I said, "Nothing." And he goes, "No, you bring donuts when somebody's done messed up, and then
out of guilt."
Yeah. And so.
Oh man. Well, I want to thank you two so much for coming on, for being very honest, very forthright. That was extremely helpful. I hope it's extremely helpful for the people who are listening. I've got to gather up my crew and run somebody to the eye doctors, and hopefully the house hasn't been destroyed while I've been on here. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for being available and for rehashing something that I don't imagine is all of that pleasant to rehash. So thank you for your time. Zoe, I'm gonna hand it off to you to go ahead and wrap us up.
Okay, well, sounds good. I do want to reiterate what Sarah said. Thank you. Want to give a really special thank you to you both for being so candid with your personal lives and your spiritual lives, especially as parents and people in ministry. It was definitely edifying hearing from that. But thanks again for joining us here at Presbygirls HQ to all you listeners. I can personally attest the unique blessings of exposure to the important topics of life and death at a young age. Truly essential. I'm about the same age as the McCall's oldest daughter, Julia. So it's been a heavy topic and story, but I am so encouraged especially to hear the role that the church and the ordinary fellowship of the saints played in ministering to them amid the hard providences, and as you just heard about the unique blessings that have come from that as well. So we hope this has been encouraging, and we also hope to catch you next time, whenever that is. And of course, I can't close without saying this, but don't throw stools at people even when they're being unsanctified.